Sarah Martinez stood at the edge of the training ground, her small frame casting a tiny shadow in the morning sun. At barely 5 feet 2 inches and weighing just over 100 pounds, she looked more like a college student than someone trying to join the elite Marine Special Operations Unit. The other recruits towered over her, their muscles bulging under their training gear as they laughed and joked about the day ahead. "Look at that," whispered Jake Thompson, a 6'3" former football player from Texas. "Did someone bring their little sister to training?" The group around him chuckled, their eyes scanning Sarah from head to toe with obvious doubt. Marcus Chen, another recruit with an impressive background in mixed martial arts, shook his head slowly. "I give her 2 days before she quits. This isn't summer camp. They're going to eat her alive in here." Sarah heard every word, but she kept her face calm and focused straight ahead. She had heard these comments her entire life. In high school, coaches told her she was too small for sports. In college, professors suggested she consider desk jobs instead of physical careers. When she announced her intention to join the Marines, her own family tried to talk her out of it. The training facility buzzed with nervous energy as 47 recruits prepared for what would be the most challenging 3 months of their lives. Only 12 would make it through to become part of the Special Operations team. The rest would either quit, get injured, or simply fail to meet the impossible standards set by their instructors. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez stepped onto the platform, his weathered face showing no emotion as he surveyed the group. His reputation preceded him. 25 years in the Marines, multiple tours in combat zones, and a training record that had broken more dreams than anyone cared to count. "Welcome to hell," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent training ground. "For the next 90 days you belong to me. You will eat when I say eat, sleep when I say sleep, and breathe when I say breathe. Most of you will not be here at the end. Most of you are not good enough." His eyes swept across the recruits and paused briefly on Sarah. She felt the weight of his stare but refused to look away. Something flickered in his expression, though whether it was amusement or annoyance she couldn't tell. "Your first test begins now," Rodriguez continued. 20-mile run with full pack. Anyone who finishes last gets sent home immediately. Anyone who quits gets sent home immediately. Anyone who complains gets sent home immediately. The recruits scrambled to grab their gear. Each pack weighed 60 pounds, loaded with everything they would need for a 3-day survival exercise. Sarah struggled slightly with the weight as she adjusted the straps, and she noticed several of the bigger recruits smirking at her obvious difficulty. "Need help there, Princess?" called out Tommy Williams, a former Army Ranger who had transferred to try for Marine Special Ops. "Maybe we should get you a smaller pack." Sarah ignored him and finished adjusting her gear. The pack felt enormous on her small frame, but she had trained for this moment for 2 years. Every morning before work she had run with weighted vests. Every evening she had practiced carrying heavy loads up and down the hills near her apartment. As the group lined up at the starting point, Sarah found herself pushed toward the back. The bigger recruits naturally formed the front ranks, their confidence evident in their posture and casual conversations about their expected finish times. "On my mark," Rodriguez shouted, raising his hand. 3, 2, 1, go!" The group surged forward like a pack of wolves, with the strongest runners immediately pulling ahead. Sarah started at a steady pace, knowing that the real challenge would come not in the first mile, but in the final 5 when exhaustion set in and the weak would begin to fall behind. Mile after mile she maintained her rhythm. The pack felt heavy, but her breathing remained controlled. Around her, she could hear the larger recruits beginning to struggle. Their initial burst of speed was costing them as their bodies burned through energy reserves too quickly. By mile 10, the group had spread out significantly. Sarah had moved from the back of the pack to somewhere in the middle, passing several recruits who were now walking or had stopped altogether. She could see the doubt in their eyes as this small woman they had dismissed so easily ran past them with steady determination. "How is she still going?" she heard one of them gasp as she passed. "This doesn't make sense." By mile 15, only 20 recruits remained in the race. The others had either quit or been picked up by the follow vehicle after collapsing from exhaustion. Sarah was now in the top 10, her pace unchanged from the beginning. The recruits who had mocked her earlier were nowhere to be seen. As they approached the final 5 miles, the real test began. This was where Rodriguez separated the pretenders from the real candidates. The course turned uphill, winding through rocky terrain that would challenge even the most experienced hikers. With 60 pounds on their backs and 15 miles already behind them, this was where most recruits broke. Sarah attacked the hill with the same steady pace she had maintained throughout the run. Behind her, she could hear the heavy breathing and stumbling steps of recruits who had started the day so confident in their superiority. The tables had turned completely, and the small woman they had written off was now leading them up the mountain. Sarah crossed the finish line in fourth place, her breathing heavy but controlled. She watched as the remaining recruits stumbled in over the next hour, some barely able to walk. Jake Thompson, who had made jokes about her size that morning, finished dead last among those who completed the course. 17 recruits had quit or been pulled from the run. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez stood at the finish line with a clipboard, marking times and making notes. When Sarah approached to report her completion, he looked at her with new interest. "Martinez, right?" he said, checking his list. "Where did you train before coming here?" "Nowhere special, sir," Sarah replied, still catching her breath. "Just on my own, preparing for this program." Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. "On your own? No military background? No college athletics? No, sir. I worked as a pharmacy technician and trained in my spare time." The drill sergeant made a note on his clipboard and moved on to the next recruit. But Sarah caught him glancing back at her several times as she helped other recruits who were struggling with exhaustion and dehydration. The next morning brought hand-to-hand combat training. The recruits were paired up for basic wrestling and defensive techniques. Sarah found herself matched against Lisa Chen, a former police officer who had significant training in self-defense. "Don't worry," Lisa said as they took their positions on the mat. "I'll go easy on you. I know this stuff can be intimidating when you're not used to physical confrontation." Sarah nodded politely, but inside she was calculating angles and leverage points. During her preparation for Marine training, she had spent hundreds of hours studying martial arts videos and practicing techniques. She might not have formal training, but she understood the principles of using an opponent's size and strength against them. The whistle blew, and Lisa immediately tried to use her height and weight advantage to pin Sarah to the ground. But Sarah slipped sideways at the last second, using Lisa's forward momentum to throw her off balance. Before Lisa could recover, Sarah had wrapped her in a submission hold that left the former police officer tapping out in surprise. "Lucky move," Lisa muttered as they reset for the next round. But it wasn't luck. Sarah repeated the performance 3 more times, each time using technique and timing to overcome Lisa's physical advantages. By the end of the session, a small crowd of recruits had gathered to watch, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion to grudging respect. Marcus Chen approached Sarah after the training session ended. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" he asked, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. "YouTube and practice," Sarah answered honestly. "I studied every technique I could find and practiced them until they became automatic." Marcus laughed, but not in a mean way. "YouTube? You're telling me you learned to fight from watching videos?" "I learned the theory from videos," Sarah corrected. "The application came from thousands of hours of practice. Every night after work, I would practice movements and techniques until my body remembered them without thinking." That evening, as the recruits sat in the mess hall comparing their aches and pains from the day's training, Sarah noticed the conversations around her had changed. Instead of dismissive comments about her size, she heard whispered discussions about her unexpected performance. "Did you see how she took down Lisa?" one recruit said quietly. "Lisa's been a cop for 8 years and Sarah made it look easy. And that run yesterday," another added. "I was dying at mile 12 and she looked like she was just getting warmed up." Tommy Williams, the former Army Ranger who had called her princess on the first day, sat down across from Sarah at dinner. His attitude was noticeably different from their first encounter. "I owe you an apology," he said, not looking directly at her. "I made assumptions about you that were wrong. That was disrespectful and unprofessional." Sarah looked up from her meal. "We all make assumptions. The important thing is what we do when we realize we were wrong." "You're taking this better than I would," Tommy admitted. "If someone had talked to me the way I talked to you, I'd probably want to punch them." "Anger uses energy I need for training," Sarah replied simply. "Besides, you weren't trying to be cruel. You were just working with incomplete information." Over the following days, Sarah's reputation among the recruits continued to grow. In obstacle course training, her small size became an advantage as she navigated tight spaces and climbing challenges that larger recruits struggled with. Her flexibility and low center of gravity made her nearly impossible to knock off balance beams and rope courses. During weapons training, her steady hands and patient approach to learning made her one of the most accurate shooters in the group. While other recruits rushed through exercises, Sarah took time to understand the mechanics of each weapon system and practice proper form until it became second nature. The instructors began to notice as well. Sergeant Rodriguez started using Sarah as an example during demonstrations, asking her to show proper technique to recruits who were struggling. Other drill sergeants would point to her form and timing as examples of how smaller fighters could succeed against larger opponents. But not everyone was happy with Sarah's rising status in the group. A faction of recruits led by Jake Thompson began to grumble that the instructors were going easy on her because she was a woman. They complained that the standards were being lowered and that her successes were somehow artificial. "This is supposed to be special ops," Jake said loudly during one evening meal. "We can't have people getting through just because they're trying really hard. This isn't about participation trophies." His comments were clearly directed at Sarah, though he didn't mention her by name. Several other recruits nodded in agreement, their earlier respect replaced by resentment as Sarah continued to outperform expectations while they struggled to keep up. The tension in the training group reached a breaking point during the fourth week of the program. Only 28 recruits remained from the original 47, and the pressure was mounting as the instructors increased the difficulty of every exercise. Sleep deprivation, physical exhaustion, and constant stress were taking their toll on everyone. Sarah had continued to excel, but she was becoming increasingly isolated from the other recruits. The group had split into two camps, those who respected her abilities and those who resented her success. Jake Thompson's faction had grown to include 6 other recruits, who felt that Sarah's presence somehow diminished their own achievements. During a particularly brutal week of survival training, the recruits were dropped in the wilderness with minimal supplies and told to find their way back to base within 72 hours. They were allowed to work in teams and naturally formed groups based on the social dynamics that had developed over the previous weeks. Sarah found herself essentially alone. The recruits who respected her abilities were already part of established groups, and Jake's faction actively excluded her from their planning. Marcus Chen tried to invite her to join his team, but she politely declined. "I appreciate the offer," she told him, "but I think I need to prove I can do this on my own." Marcus looked concerned. "This isn't about proving anything anymore, Sarah. This is about survival. The teams that work together are going to have a huge advantage." Sarah smiled. "Then I'll just have to be better prepared than the teams." She set off into the wilderness alone while the other groups headed in different directions. Her strategy was different from the others. Instead of trying to cover ground quickly, she focused on moving efficiently and conserving energy. She had studied the topographical maps extensively and identified several potential routes back to base. While other teams struggled with navigation and argued about which direction to go, Sarah moved steadily through the terrain. She rationed her limited food carefully, found clean water sources, and built efficient shelters that kept her warm without wasting energy on construction. On the second night, she encountered Jake's team. They were lost, exhausted, and running low on water. Their initial confidence had given way to frustration and blame as their planned shortcuts had led them in circles. "Well, look who we found," Jake said when he spotted Sarah's small campfire. "The lone wolf. How's that working out for you?" Sarah looked up from the map she was studying. "Pretty well. I should reach base by tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds." The members of Jake's team exchanged glances. They had been walking for 2 days and still weren't sure they were heading in the right direction. "Maybe we should ask for her help," suggested one of the team members quietly. Jake's face flushed red. "We don't need help from her. We're special forces candidates, not lost hikers." Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to continue her journey. "There's a stream about half a mile east of here if you need water," she said as she shouldered her pack. "And the game trail you passed an hour ago actually leads toward base, not away from it." She disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jake's team to decide whether their pride was worth more than their mission success. Sarah reached base camp 6 hours ahead of the next closest team. She had completed the navigation course perfectly, arrived in good physical condition, and had even collected several edible plants along the way to supplement her emergency rations. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting at the checkpoint when she emerged from the tree line. Martinez, you're early. Yes, sir. The route through the eastern valley was more efficient than expected. Rodriguez checked his watch and made a note on his clipboard. You were out there alone for 3 days. How was that? Sarah considered the question. Educational, sir. I learned that I can rely on my preparation and decision-making under stress. And you weren't concerned about the disadvantage of working alone? Every situation has advantages and disadvantages, sir. Working alone meant I could move at my own pace and make decisions quickly without having to build consensus. The disadvantage was having no backup if something went wrong, so I had to be more careful about risk management. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. Smart thinking. Get some rest. The next phase starts tomorrow. Over the following hours, the other team straggled in. Marcus's group arrived second, looking tired but accomplished. Jake's team came in dead last, and it was clear from their expressions that their experience had not gone well. They had run out of water on the final day and had to be resupplied by the safety team. That evening, as the recruits shared stories from their survival exercise, the dynamics in the group shifted again. Sarah's solo success had impressed even some of her harshest critics. The fact that she had not only survived alone but had actually outperformed all the teams was impossible to ignore. I have to admit, said Tommy Williams, that was pretty impressive. I don't think I could have done that alone. But Jake Thompson was not ready to admit defeat. His failure during the survival exercise had only hardened his resolve to prove that Sarah didn't belong in the program. One exercise doesn't prove anything, he muttered to his remaining supporters. She got lucky with the weather and the route. Wait until we get to the real combat training. That's where size and strength really matter. His opportunity came sooner than expected. The next phase of training focused on close-quarters combat scenarios. The recruits would be put through simulated, combat situations that tested not only their fighting skills, but their ability to think clearly under extreme pressure. The exercise was designed to be as realistic as possible. The recruits would face multiple opponents in confined spaces, using rubber training weapons that still delivered painful impacts. The goal was to neutralize all threats while minimizing damage to hostages and innocent bystanders. Jake saw this as his chance to finally expose what he believed were Sarah's limitations. During the preparation briefing, he volunteered his team to serve as the opposition force for Sarah's first scenario. The combat simulation arena was set up to resemble a hostage situation in an office building. Multiple rooms connected by narrow hallways with cardboard cutouts representing civilians mixed among the combat targets. The exercise would test everything the recruits had learned about tactical movement, target identification, and decision-making under pressure. Sarah stood at the entrance to the simulation course, wearing full tactical gear and carrying training weapons loaded with paint rounds. The safety equipment felt heavy and awkward, but she had spent the previous evening practicing movements and weapon transitions until they felt natural. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez briefed her on the scenario. 5 hostile targets inside, unknown number of civilians. Your mission is to neutralize all threats and secure the area. You'll be evaluated on speed, accuracy, safety protocols, and tactical decision-making. What Rodriguez didn't tell Sarah was that Jake Thompson had specifically requested to play the role of the primary threat. He had convinced the other opposition members that they needed to make this exercise as challenging as possible to properly test her capabilities. Make her work for it. Jake had told his team during their preparation. No easy targets, no obvious mistakes. If she's really good enough to be here, she should be able to handle whatever we throw at her. The simulation began with Sarah entering the building through a ground-floor window. The first room appeared empty, but she moved carefully, checking corners and potential hiding spots. Her training had taught her that the most dangerous moments came when everything seemed safe. She was right to be cautious. As she moved toward the hallway, Jake emerged from behind a partition, his training weapon aimed directly at her center mass. In a real situation, she would have been dead, but Sarah had anticipated this possibility. Instead of entering the room in a straight line, she had moved at an angle that kept her near cover. When Jake appeared, she was already dropping to one knee and rolling behind a desk. Jake's first shot missed by inches, striking the wall where Sarah's head had been a split second earlier. Before he could fire again, Sarah had acquired his position and returned fire with 2 quick, accurate shots that left bright red paint marks on his chest and shoulder. "First target neutralized," came the announcement over the intercom system. Jake stared down at the paint marks in disbelief. He had been eliminated in less than 10 seconds, and he wasn't even sure how it had happened. Sarah had moved so quickly and smoothly that his mind was still trying to process the sequence of events. But there was no time for analysis. The exercise was continuing, and Sarah was already moving toward the next room. She had heard movement from the floor above and needed to clear the remaining threats while staying alert for civilians who might be caught in the crossfire. The second opposition member was waiting in the stairwell, thinking he had the advantage of high ground and a clear field of fire. But Sarah didn't use the stairs. Instead, she found an alternate route through a maintenance area that brought her up behind his position. When she emerged from the maintenance door, the opposition fighter was still watching the stairs, completely unaware that his target was now behind him. Sarah's training round struck him in the back. Before he could turn around, second target neutralized. The remaining 3 opposition members had heard the shots and were now actively hunting for Sarah. They moved through the upper floor in a coordinated pattern, covering each other's movements and communicating through hand signals. Sarah knew she was outnumbered and that her opponents would be expecting her to continue moving upward through the building. Instead, she changed tactics entirely. Using her small size to advantage, she moved through spaces that larger fighters couldn't access, traveling through ductwork and between wall partitions. Her unconventional approach allowed her to observe the remaining threats without being detected. She watched as they searched room by room, growing increasingly frustrated as they failed to locate their target. When she finally struck, it was with devastating efficiency. She emerged from a ceiling access panel directly above 2 of the fighters, dropping down between them before they could react. Her training weapons fired in rapid succession, marking both targets before they could bring their own weapons to bear. Third and fourth targets neutralized. The final opposition member, realizing he was alone, tried to change his strategy from hunter to survivor. He barricaded himself in a room with several civilian cutouts, hoping to force Sarah into a difficult tactical situation where she might accidentally engage innocent targets. It was a smart move. But Sarah had been preparing for exactly this scenario. She used a small mirror to observe the room layout from the hallway, identifying the positions of both the threat and the civilians. Instead of charging in, she created a distraction at one entrance while entering through another. The final opposition fighter never saw her coming. He was focused on the doorway where he expected her to appear when Sarah's shot struck him from the side. All targets neutralized. Exercise complete. The entire simulation had taken 12 minutes. Sarah had eliminated 5 opposition fighters without taking a single hit, and without endangering any of the civilian cutouts. Her movement through the building had been so efficient that most of the instructors watching the exercise were still trying to figure out how she had gotten from one position to another. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez was taking notes furiously as Sarah emerged from the simulation course. The other recruits who had been watching the exercise were completely silent, their earlier assumptions about Sarah's capabilities now thoroughly demolished. Jake Thompson stood off to the side, still staring at the paint marks on his tactical vest. The exercise had been designed to be challenging, but Sarah had made it look almost easy. Her speed, accuracy, and tactical thinking had been flawless. How did she move so fast? One of the watching recruits whispered to another, "Did you see how she got behind Jake? I was watching the whole time and I still don't understand how she did it." Marcus Chen approached Sarah as she was cleaning her training weapons. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "I've never seen anyone move through a course like that." Sarah looked up from her weapon maintenance. It wasn't about moving fast. It was about moving smart. Every wasted motion cost time and energy you might need later. But the way you got around those guys, it was like you could see through walls. I just paid attention to sound and tried to think about where they would expect me to be, then made sure I was somewhere else. The conversation was interrupted by Drill Sergeant Rodriguez calling the group together for the after-action review. This was where each exercise was analyzed in detail, with both successes and failures discussed openly. "Martinez," Rodriguez began, "outstanding performance, perfect score on target identification, no civilian casualties, and excellent tactical movement. Your time of 12 minutes is the fastest we've recorded for this exercise." He turned to address the group. "I want everyone to pay attention to what just happened here. This wasn't about superior physical strength or size. This was about preparation, tactical thinking, and flawless execution under pressure. Jake Thompson raised his hand.
Sir, request permission to speak. Rodriguez nodded.
Go ahead, Thompson. Sir, I think we need to acknowledge that Martinez just demonstrated skills that exceed what any of us expected. I owe her an apology and my respect. The admission from Jake, who had been Sarah's harshest critic, sent a clear message to the remaining recruits. If even Jake could acknowledge her abilities, then there was no longer any room for doubt about whether Sarah belonged in the program. The final month of training brought new challenges that pushed the remaining recruits to their absolute limits. Only 15 candidates remained from the original 47, and each day brought new tests designed to identify who had the mental toughness to succeed in actual combat operations. Sarah had become something of a legend among her fellow recruits. Her performance in the combat simulation had been just the beginning of a string of achievements that defied conventional expectations. During psychological stress testing, she maintained perfect focus while other recruits cracked under pressure. In leadership exercises, she demonstrated an ability to inspire confidence and coordinate team actions that impressed even the most experienced instructors. But the real test came during the final evaluation exercise. Complex multi-day scenario that would determine which recruits would be selected for the Special Operations Team. The exercise was designed to simulate a real-world mission with multiple objectives, limited resources, and constantly changing conditions. The remaining 15 recruits were divided into 3 teams of 5 members each. Sarah found herself assigned to Team Alpha, along with Marcus Chen, Tommy Williams, and 2 other recruits who had consistently performed well throughout the program. Jake Thompson had been eliminated 2 weeks earlier after failing a navigation exercise, his departure marking the end of the organized resistance to Sarah's success. The mission briefing was intentionally vague. Team Alpha was told to infiltrate a simulated enemy compound, gather intelligence on weapon stockpiles, and extract a high-value target without being detected. They had 48 hours to complete all objectives, and failure in any single area would result in elimination from the program. What made the exercise particularly challenging was that the opposing force was made up of actual Marine Special Operations veterans, not fellow recruits. These were experienced fighters who knew every trick and tactic the recruits had learned, and they would show no mercy in their efforts to stop the infiltration. Team Alpha spent the first 4 hours of their preparation time studying maps, analyzing intelligence reports, and developing their plan of attack. Sarah found herself naturally taking on a leadership role, her calm analytical approach helping the team work through complex logistical challenges. The main compound has 3 buildings, she explained to her teammates, pointing to the aerial photographs spread across their planning table. The intelligence report suggests the weapon stockpiles are in Building 2, but the high-value target is being held in Building 3. Marcus studied the layout carefully. The problem is that Buildings 2 and 3 are on opposite sides of the compound. If we hit one target first, the noise will alert security around the other target. Tommy nodded in agreement. And these aren't training dummies we're going up against. These guys have real combat experience. They'll coordinate their response and lock down the entire compound the moment they know we're there. Sarah traced potential approach routes with her finger. What if we don't hit them sequentially? What if we coordinate simultaneous strikes on both buildings? The idea was ambitious, perhaps even reckless. It would require splitting their already small team and executing 2 complex operations at exactly the same time. Any mistake or delay by either group would doom both missions. That's a huge risk, said one of the other team members. If something goes wrong with the timing, we'll be caught in the open with no backup. Sarah looked around the table at her teammates. Everything about this mission is a huge risk. The question is whether we want to take a risk that gives us a chance of success, or play it safe and accept probable failure. After 2 more hours of detailed planning, Team Alpha had developed a strategy that was unlike anything the other teams were considering. While Teams Bravo and Charlie focused on traditional infiltration approaches, Team Alpha prepared for a coordinated assault that would require perfect timing and flawless execution. The exercise began at sunset, with all 3 teams moving toward their target areas under cover of darkness. Team Alpha split into 2 groups as soon as they reached the perimeter of the compound. Sarah and Marcus would handle the intelligence gathering mission in Building 2, While Tommy and the other two team members would attempt the hostage extraction in Building 3, Sarah and Marcus moved through the compound like shadows, using every piece of cover and concealment to avoid the roving security patrols. The opposing force had set up a realistic security perimeter, with overlapping fields of observation that made undetected movement extremely difficult. But Sarah had studied the patrol patterns during their reconnaissance phase, and she had identified a brief window when the security coverage would have a gap. The window lasted only 90 seconds, and it occurred every 20 minutes as the patrols rotated through their routes. When the opportunity came, Sarah and Marcus moved with practiced efficiency. They covered the open ground between the perimeter fence and Building 2 in less than a minute, reaching the structure just as the next security patrol came around the corner. Inside Building 2, they found exactly what they were looking for: detailed information about weapon stockpiles, supply routes, and operational plans. But they also found something unexpected: evidence that the high-value target in Building 3 was not just a prisoner, but was actually working with the enemy as a double agent. This intelligence changed everything. Instead of simply extracting the target, Team Alpha would need to capture him without alerting his handlers to the fact that his cover had been blown. Sarah used her radio to communicate the new information to Tommy's group, speaking in the coded language they had developed during their planning phase. The message was simple: the extraction had become a capture mission, and they needed to modify their approach accordingly. Meanwhile, Teams Bravo and Charlie were encountering serious problems with their more conventional strategies. Team Bravo had been detected during their initial infiltration attempt and was now pinned down by security forces. Team Charlie had successfully entered the compound but had become lost in the complex layout and was running out of time to complete their objectives. Tommy's group received Sarah's update just as they were preparing to breach Building 3. The change in mission parameters required them to completely revise their entry strategy, but they adapted quickly to the new requirements. The simultaneous operations began at exactly 200 hours. Sarah and Marcus completed their intelligence gathering and began their extraction just as Tommy's team initiated their capture operation. The timing was perfect. Security forces responding to activity at Building 3 were drawn away from Building 2, giving Sarah and Marcus a clear escape route. But the real test came when Tommy's team encountered unexpected resistance. The double agent had bodyguards who were not part of the exercise scenario, and the team found themselves in a genuine firefight with training weapons. Sarah heard the gunfire and made a split-second decision that would define her entire military career. Instead of continuing with her planned extraction route, she turned back toward Building 3 to provide support for her teammates. The sound of intense gunfire echoed across the compound as Sarah sprinted toward Building 3. Through her night vision goggles, she could see muzzle flashes from the upper floor windows where Tommy's team was engaged in fierce combat. The original plan had called for a quiet extraction, but something had gone terribly wrong. Marcus followed close behind her, both of them abandoning their original escape route to help their teammates. As they approached the building, Sarah could hear Tommy's voice over the radio, strained and urgent. "Alpha 1, we've got 5 hostiles instead of 2. Repeat, 5 hostiles. They're using real military tactics and we're taking heavy fire." Sarah's mind raced as she processed the information. 5 opponents meant that Tommy's 3-person team was significantly outnumbered, and the fact that the enemy was using advanced tactics suggested these weren't just the usual training opposition forces. She reached the base of Building 3 and immediately assessed the tactical situation. The hostile forces had positioned themselves to control the main stairwell, effectively trapping Tommy's team on the upper floor. Any attempt to retreat down the stairs would result in certain elimination from the exercise. But Sarah had noticed something during her earlier reconnaissance that the enemy forces might not have considered. Building 3 had an external fire escape that connected to a maintenance ladder system. If she could access the building from outside, she might be able to attack the hostile positions from an unexpected direction. "Marcus, take position here and provide covering fire on my signal," she whispered into her radio. "I'm going to try a flanking maneuver." Before Marcus could object to the dangerous plan, Sarah was already moving. She climbed the external fire escape with the speed and agility that had made her famous among the recruits. Her small size and excellent physical conditioning allowed her to move up the metal framework almost silently. Through the building's windows, she could see the tactical situation unfolding inside. The 5 hostile forces had indeed taken control of the main stairwell, and they were methodically advancing toward Tommy's team's position. But their focus was entirely on the internal threat. None of them were watching for external approaches. Sarah reached the 3rd floor and carefully examined the window leading into the building. It was unlocked, suggesting that the opposition forces had not considered the possibility of an external assault. She took a deep breath and prepared for what would be the most challenging combat sequence of her training. She entered through the window in complete silence, finding herself behind the hostile positions. The enemy fighters were so focused on their advance up the stairwell that they had no idea they were now being hunted from behind. What happened next would be discussed in Marine training schools for years to come. Sarah moved through the building like a force of nature, using every technique she had learned and several she improvised on the spot. Her approach was methodical, efficient, and absolutely devastating. The first hostile fighter never knew what hit him. Sarah approached from his blind spot and eliminated him with 2 precise shots before he could turn around. The second fighter heard his teammate fall and began to turn toward the noise. But Sarah was already moving to her next position. She used the building's layout to her advantage, moving through rooms and corridors in ways that kept her out of sight, while allowing her to attack from unexpected angles. The hostile forces found themselves unable to establish clear fields of fire because their targets seemed to appear and disappear like a ghost. The third fighter managed to get off several shots in Sarah's direction, but she had anticipated his position and was already behind cover when he fired. Her return shot struck him center mass, eliminating him from the exercise with perfect accuracy. By this point, the remaining 2 hostile fighters realized they were under attack from behind, but they were trapped between Sarah's position and Tommy's team advancing from the upper floor. They tried to establish a defensive position in the central hallway, but this just made them easier targets. Sarah coordinated with Tommy over the radio, timing their final assault to catch the enemy forces in a crossfire. When they struck, it was with overwhelming force and precision. The remaining hostile fighters were eliminated within seconds, their elimination so swift and complete that the exercise observers had difficulty following exactly what had happened. "All hostiles neutralized," came the announcement over the intercom system. Team Alpha has successfully completed both primary objectives. But the real shock came when the exercise observers reviewed the engagement statistics. Sarah had personally eliminated 4 of the 5 hostile fighters in less than 3 minutes, moving through the building and engaging targets with an efficiency that exceeded anything the instructors had ever witnessed. The opposing forces, who were actual special operations veterans with years of combat experience, were stunned by what had happened. They had been outfought by a recruit who weighed barely over 100 pounds and had never seen actual combat. How did she do that? One of them asked Drill Sergeant Rodriguez during the post-exercise debrief. "I've been doing this for 15 years and I've never seen movement like that." Rodriguez reviewed his notes from the exercise. She used the building's architecture to create multiple attack vectors while maintaining complete situational awareness. Every movement was calculated to give her maximum advantage while minimizing her exposure to return fire. But the speed, the accuracy, the tactical decision-making, that's not something you learn in basic training. "No," Rodriguez agreed. "That's something you're born with and then spend years developing." Martinez has natural instincts for combat that can't be taught. The other teams had completed their missions as well, but none with the efficiency and innovation displayed by Team Alpha. Team Bravo had eventually succeeded after being detected and fighting their way through the compound. Team Charlie had completed their objectives but had taken much longer and made several tactical errors. When all the teams assembled for the final evaluation, it was clear that the exercise had identified a clear hierarchy among the remaining recruits. Sarah's performance had been exceptional even by special operations standards, and her teammates had been elevated by their association with her tactical brilliance. The final selection results would be announced the following morning, but everyone already knew that Sarah had earned her place among the elite. The question was no longer whether she belonged in special operations. It was whether special operations was ready for someone with her capabilities. That evening, as the recruits cleaned their equipment and prepared for the graduation ceremony, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had started the program as an unknown quantity, dismissed by her peers and doubted by her instructors. Now she stood as the top graduate of one of the most challenging military training programs in the world. The small woman who had been called weak just 3 months earlier had proven herself capable of outfighting experienced Marines in direct combat. But more importantly, she had learned that her true strength was not in her physical capabilities or her tactical skills. Her strength was in her ability to see possibilities that others missed, to find solutions where others saw only problems, and to remain calm and focused when everything around her was chaos. The graduation ceremony took place on a crisp morning exactly 90 days after Sarah had first stepped onto the training ground. Of the original 47 recruits, only 12 had successfully completed the program. They stood in perfect formation, wearing their dress uniforms and the distinctive insignia that marked them as members of the Marine Special Operations community. Sarah stood in the front row, having been selected as the honor graduate of her class. The small woman who had been dismissed as too weak to complete the program was now recognized as the most outstanding recruit in one of the most elite military units in the world. General Patricia Hayes, the commanding officer of Marine Special Operations Command, delivered the graduation address. She was a legendary figure in military circles, known for her own groundbreaking achievements as one of the first women to serve in special operations roles. Today we recognize 12 individuals who have demonstrated the highest levels of skill, dedication, and courage, General Hayes announced to the assembled crowd of family members, instructors, and military officials. These Marines have proven themselves capable of handling the most challenging missions our nation might ask of them. Her eyes found Sarah in the formation. But today we also witness something truly special. We see proof that excellence in military service is not determined by size or strength, but by intelligence, determination, and an unwavering commitment to mission success. The ceremony continued with the presentation of awards and qualifications. Each graduate received their special operations certification and assignment to operational units. When Sarah's name was called, she stepped forward to receive not only her certification, but also the award for outstanding achievement in training. Lance Corporal Sarah Martinez, General Hayes announced, has demonstrated exceptional performance in all phases of training. Her innovative tactical thinking, flawless execution under pressure, and natural leadership abilities mark her as a Marine of extraordinary potential. As Sarah shook hands with the general, the older officer leaned close and spoke quietly. "The instructors tell me you accomplished something that's never been done before in that final exercise. They say you took down 5 experienced operators in less than 3 minutes." Sarah replied with characteristic modesty. "I had excellent teammates, ma'am. The success belonged to the entire team." General Hayes smiled, spoken like a true leader. "Your first assignment will be with 3rd Force Reconnaissance Company. They've specifically requested you based on your training performance." After the ceremony, as families and friends gathered for the reception, Sarah found herself surrounded by instructors and fellow graduates who wanted to understand how she had achieved such remarkable success. The transformation from doubted recruit to elite warrior had captured everyone's imagination. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez approached her with a broad smile. "Martinez, I owe you an apology. When I first saw you on that training ground, I thought you'd be gone within a week. What changed your mind, sir? That first run, when you passed recruits twice your size and never broke your pace, I realized I was looking at something special. But even then, I had no idea just how special." Marcus Chen, who had been assigned to the same unit as Sarah, joined the conversation. "I still can't believe that final exercise. The way you moved through that building, it was like watching someone who had been doing special operations for years." Tommy Williams, who had been selected for a different unit, nodded in agreement. "I've been thinking about it all night. You didn't just outfight those guys, you outthought them. Every move you made was 3 steps ahead of what they expected." Sarah looked around at her fellow graduates, men and women who had proven themselves among the best of the best. "I learned something important during these 3 months. People make assumptions about what's possible based on what they can see, but the most important battles are won by what you can't see. Preparation, intelligence, and the willingness to do whatever it takes to succeed." Jake Thompson, who had been allowed to attend the ceremony despite his elimination from the program, approached the group. His earlier hostility had been replaced by genuine respect and admiration. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you," he said, extending his hand. "You taught me something about leadership that I'll never forget. Real strength isn't about intimidating people or proving you're the biggest person in the room. It's about making everyone around you better. You would have figured that out eventually, Sarah replied, shaking his hand. The training here breaks down everyone's preconceptions and shows us who we really are. As the reception continued, Sarah's story spread among the military personnel in attendance. Word of the small recruit who had outperformed everyone's expectations was already becoming legendary within special operations circles. Colonel James Mitchell, Sarah's new commanding officer, introduced himself during the reception. Lance Corporal Martinez, I've been briefed on your training performance. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can accomplish in an operational environment. Thank you, sir. I'm ready for whatever challenges come next. Good, because they will come. Special operations is not about graduation ceremonies and awards. It's about facing impossible situations and finding ways to succeed when failure would cost lives. Sarah nodded seriously. I understand, sir. Everything up to this point has been preparation. The real work starts now. As the day wound down and the graduates prepared to report to their new units, Sarah took a moment to reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. 3 months earlier, she had been a pharmacy technician with a dream of serving in the military's most elite units. People had called her weak, too small, unrealistic in her ambitions. Now she was a Marine special operator, recognized as one of the most promising young warriors in the entire military. The doubts and dismissals had been replaced by respect and admiration from some of the most experienced fighters in the world. But more importantly, Sarah had learned that true strength came not from meeting other people's expectations, but from exceeding your own. The girl who had been called weak had discovered that weakness and strength were not about physical size or conventional capabilities. They were about the willingness to face challenges that seemed impossible and find ways to overcome them. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her parents, who had been unable to attend the ceremony. We saw the news coverage of your graduation. We're so proud of you. You proved that anything is possible when you refuse to give up. Sarah smiled as she read the message. She had indeed proven that anything was possible. But more than that, she had shown that the greatest limitations were often the ones people placed on themselves and each other. As she prepared to begin her career as a Special Operations Marine, Sarah knew that the challenges ahead would be even greater than those she had already overcome, but she also knew that she had developed the skills, knowledge, and confidence to handle whatever came next. The woman they had called weak was ready to show the world what real strength looked like.